Omer, what a wonderful surprise to have you back with us. You were the host of Let the Quran Speak many, many years ago, and it's so nice to have you back as a lawyer here in the guest chair. So welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Oh, happy to be here.
Now, when you heard the verdict on the case of Abdirahman Abdi and his death, I'm guessing that this wasn't really a surprise to you because you've handled cases that are somewhat similar to Abdirahman, right?
Yes. Even though criminal law is something I haven't practiced too much of, it is still something that comes across my desks, I think, just by virtue of being a racialized litigator. And it was not surprising, to be honest with you. The criminal standard is so high that it would have been more surprising if it went the other way. Not to say that it can't or it shouldn't, it's just to say that the standard is so high that it's very rare that this happens. And in this particular case, it was going to be even harder, considering the facts of the case.
So can you tell me a little bit about the cases that you've dealt with? I know we don't want to violate client confidentiality, but maybe you can speak broadly.
Well, look, when I started with a criminal law firm to start with. And they often handed me cases that nobody else wanted to do. As a junior lawyer, that's what happens. And one of the first cases I got was a mental health issue. It was a young man who was dealing with paranoid schizophrenia, amongst other things. And his family on one day called the police because they didn't know how to handle him anymore. They had no idea what they were in for. Luckily, he was contained. He wasn't really harmed. But even then, just the whole mental health diversion route within the criminal system took us over a year to get through because there's certain rules that are set in place. He has to take his medication. He has to admit to a certain amount of liability, even though it's not on the record, but the forms require it. And for a paranoid schizophrenic, that's not an easy thing to do to begin with. And if he was taking his medication to start with, none of this would have happened. So again, he doesn't really want to take his medication either. And then at the end of all this, to bring it all together, he is a paranoid schizophrenic, which means by definition, he's paranoid of me as well. So as a lawyer, it's very difficult, and we're not trained to deal with somebody who doesn't trust you because that's the cornerstone of any relationship. The only thing that helped in that particular case, it just happened to be somebody who went to the same high school as me and around the same years I was there. So he was somewhat familiar with me. That family, I can tell you, will never go to the police again. They after having to leave work on multiple occasions to be in the courthouse, to spend the money that was required to deal with it properly, even though at the end result he got a mental health diversion, so no criminal record, it was just too much of a hassle. And I think when we discuss the changes that need to be brought, I think this case really speaks pretty strongly to them.
Because it's a double whammy, right? It's like the police dealing with racialized communities, but also dealing with people who have mental health issues. And then when you bring the two together, it's just a catastrophe.
Well, that's exactly it. I think a lot of the research, the way they speak of it, it's very interesting to me because a lot of the research speaks of almost like thresholds or check marks. And when you have that check mark, the risk levels go higher. So sex is often one of those check marks. Race is most definitely one of those check marks. And then mental health is another check mark. So people with mental health are almost twice as likely to be assaulted in general, whether it's police or otherwise. And then when you put the race card on top of that, it just increases that chance just that much higher. And from currently what's happened, some of the things that really stand out is that it's not the judicial system, in my opinion, that's the problem. It's the standards that are in place that are a problem. And one of the things that Justice Kelly said in his decision, I made some notes because it was just an interesting decision. In paragraph 240, he actually says there's no legal requirement to de-escalate. Now, all lawyers know this, but this is part of the problem. When we deal with racialized clients, currently have two young men, both of Somali descent, that were mishandled by the police. The issue was de-escalation. It wasn't de-escalated by the police, and in their cases, luckily, it was just minor injuries and more mental trauma by the end of it all. But it could very easily have resulted in something much worse because of the way the police are handling these things.
So how do we fix that, Omer? Is there a problem with the criminal justice system? 100%.
And it's not just the criminal justice system. What it is it started maybe 40, 50 years ago when we moved from an institutionalized system onto a community-based system for mental health especially. That's where the problem started, because rather than an institution dealing with these problems, now you have police officers that are in the front lines. And it's hard to blame them because they're not trained for this either. So when there's calls to defund the police, for example, they don't make a whole lot of sense in the context of what we're hearing from other professionals, because the professionals are saying that there are certain changes that need to be made, but they would, of course, require more funding. So
because there's no backup, there's no mental health system that supports these individuals.
Well,
so when there's a problem, right, when there's someone's in a mental health crisis, who do you call? The police, right?
The police. And that's the problem, right? So with Mr. Omer Chaudhry just recently, one of the big issues with that was they called a non-emergency line, but they still got armed police officers coming to the door, which is a problem. In Mr. Abdi's case, it would have been armed police officers. In Mr. Abdi's case, it was a 911 call because of the disturbance that was caused. And so it was always going to be that. But there are solutions that have been talked about for ages. CAMH, which is down the street from the studio here, CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, just in June said that this has to stop. It can't be police at the forefront. That has to change. But this has been talked about for years. I did some quick research, and the same organization out in BC in 2005 released a research paper where they said specifically the changes that need to be made. And one of the first ones is that the police can't be the first responders. The second usually is that better training for police. And the third usually is that we need joint squads. So not only should it be mental health professional responding, but there should be police squads with mental health embedded within them. So that in Mr. Abdi's case, for example, when the police officer says that I pepper sprayed him in the face and nothing happened, that I used all my force to hit him behind the knees, which would level anybody, but not Mr. Abdi for some reason, these are indicators, okay, something's not right here. A person embedded within that police force who can deal with it would have been the better answer. And to be frank, where I believe it went wrong is when he entered that building at the end, the police officer in his testimony, and the judge notes it, says, if I didn't stop him then, we wouldn't have arrested him. And if that's the case, then in hindsight at least, maybe we shouldn't have arrested him. Maybe let him be, and we'll have a better mental health team coming in later to deal with this issue.
Can we talk about accountability a little bit? Because, you know, the Special Investigations Unit is the one who puts out this, you know, who judges whether the police officer acted appropriately. And I believe something like 3 to 5% of these cases, you actually find that the police officer is convicted.
Yes.
So that's a pretty low rate.
100%.
Do you think the Special Investigations Unit is the right unit to be able to deal with possible police brutality?
I mean, to be frank with you, it's almost impossible to say based on the percentage numbers, just because you have to remember, like even in this decision, Justice Kelly did a great job of really breaking down what happened and why there's no criminal liability. Criminal liability is a huge threshold, and the SIU might, in most cases, are probably getting cases where it was justified, whatever police force is being used. And even if it's not, the standard needs to be different. So whatever SIU is applying needs to change. So the problem might not be with SIU so much as it is with the standards that we're still using for individuals. And that needs to first change. I think Justice Kelly is signaling that in his decision by saying that, hey, look, this is a standard I have to apply. And under that standard, this is okay. It's borderline, but it seems it's enough of a doubt in my mind that it's okay. So the accountability piece, there's definitely civil liability that will exist in most of these cases, and that's probably the better route anyways. On the criminal side, it's very difficult because police officers have to have certain leeway. And it's always going to be a standard that's flexible, and flexible standards will always be applied in different ways by different judges.
Omer, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you join us again.
No problem. Thanks for having me.